In other words, I'm going to be expecting you to get involved. One of the things that you can do to get involved is by making use of your personal devices of some kind or other, and these are the 3 sites that we're actually going to be making use of in today's workshop. We're going to be going very, very quickly. So one of the things that we can do is go to today's meet, and what it does essentially is give us a closed channel for discussion. So we've got a back discussion that can actually occur rather than just the kinds of conversations that we can have orally. So if you've got a question that you have, but you don't want to necessarily voice it in front of all of the individuals, you can place it there. We can continue this back channel so it's available for a week, and it can essentially facilitate discussions as we're going along. We can also make use of Padlet, and Padlet essentially is an electronic version of a corkboard. So if you think about a corkboard, and you can post things onto a corkboard, this is an electronic version. So if you go to Padlet itself, just do a double click on the actual URL that's actually listed there. You will actually have the ability to post words, or pictures, or videos, or all kinds of different forms of files, etc. Finally, we're also going to make use of WebGrid Plus. WebGrid Plus is essentially an electronic version of a Repertory grid system. This is a system that was put together by Drs. Mildred Shaw and Brian Gaines, originally out of the University of Calgary in the west of Canada. Now they're retired and living on the west coast in the island somewhere. And Brian and Mildred are still very much involved in the production of WebGrid. By the way, you can get WebGrid from 2 different places here in Canada. One is UVic, so the University of Victoria in British Columbia. The other one is at the EI Lab, which is my lab space, and that is, the URL is just grid.eilab.ca. So we'll make use of those 3 pieces as we're going along. To make reference to my background, and Michael also talked about this from the perspective of George Kelly's ideas, I come back from a science education background. My original degree is in marine biology from the University of Guelph, PA. Anyways, and I've got all of 9 months experience in the field until one of those recessions came along and took care of that. Anyways, so I've been in education ever since, doing science education from Alberta all the way through to Ontario for 18 years in the classroom or associated with the classroom. Last experience was in Toronto District School Board, where I was a science coordinator. So what we typically do in education research, so my background obviously is in education, so I look at construct theory from the perspective of what does it do for me in education. That gives me to a very pragmatic kind of orientation rather than focusing specifically on the psychology of it, even though of course the psychology is important. So typically what we do in educational research is do some kind of pretest, so figure out what the actual system is like to begin with. Then we'll do some kind of post-test at the end of the time that we're working with our participants, and we try to figure out, so what happened in between? And hopefully we've had some kind of impact through some kind of intervention in the lives or the thinking of the individuals who are participating. The problem with this is that you always have to make guesses or interpolate what's actually happening in between, because we can't take snapshots of the people's minds as they're going through these kinds of pieces. All we've got, essentially, as an educator, is their behaviors. And we try to figure out what's going on in terms of their thinking process as a result. So drawing on personal construct theory, I'll just go very quickly through this because I think Michael did a much better job. The repertory grid expresses one's finite systems of cross-references between personal observations that are made and personal constructs that are erected. That's George Kelly himself. And then Fiax and Alvarez, repertory grid in its many forms is a method used to explore the structure and content of these implicit theories personal meanings through which we perceive and act in our day-to-day existence. All right, here is an example of a repertory grid that is produced by WebGrid. There's a lot of components to these, but you will see a lot of commonalities that we've already seen this morning. So here are elements, or a list of ideas about a particular topic. In this particular instance, they're all about pedagogical methodologies. So what can we actually do in the classroom? So it could be, we can be lecturing, we could be doing Socratic lessons, in other words, questioning students in some way, shape, or form. We could be doing a hands-on activity in a laboratory, whether that be a wet or a dry lab. We could be doing an audio-video presentation. We could be doing demonstrations, worksheet-driven practice, information retrieval, processing, and presentation, simulations, open-ended and original research. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just a representation of a repertory grid that I did probably about 15 years ago at this point in time. So it's giving us a snapshot of what I knew about pedagogical structures at this point in time. And the one piece that, to my chagrin, doesn't even come up is problem-based learning. And that's what I've spent most of the last 15 years on, which is kind of interesting. Anyways, we also see these dichotomous constructs showing up in this repertory grid as well. I believe that students dislike, I believe that students like, builds student self-esteem, doesn't build student self-esteem, etc. So we've got a number of constructs, a number of elements, and then they are rated against each other. So we've got lecture showing up as 5, 9, 9, 9 against these particular pieces. So there's a grid underneath this that runs from 1 to 9, and we've had people actually rating each of the elements against each of the constructs. It goes further than that though, because I didn't create the elements and I don't create the constructs. We allow for the individuals who are participating to actually come up with those themselves. Otherwise, I'm imposing my view of the world onto their particular thought structure, and it may or may not be appropriate. We also see correlations or matches off to the right-hand side. So you can see the percentages, and this is reflective of a lot of the statistical analysis that is actually done by the program, WebGrid program itself, in the background. So you don't actually have to do the stats. All you need to do is be able to analyze the actual results. So when taking a look at this, we see that there is a relationship between this construct, as a teacher I like, as a teacher I dislike, and the construct promotes scientific skills, does not promote scientific skills, and the match is about 90%. So it's a fairly tight relationship between those two constructs. I'm just showing you how you'd actually read this particular result. We also have another match between those two constructs and the next one underneath it. So is student-directed versus is teacher-directed, and this one is less of a match, but just only slightly. So it's probably at about 86–87% match. And similarly, we can have relationships show up between the elements as well. So these, again, are essentially their correlations between the elements and the constructs, and you can actually make some decisions based on what is actually showing up as a result of doing these. So this is a sample repertory grid, and we're going to go through the process of creating your own. So the first place that we'll start is the elements side of things. So as I said earlier, the elements are a list of examples that illustrate the topic. And the topic in the example that we were just looking at is learning provided through pedagogical strategies. I'm not sure that I actually believe that anymore, but that's the reason for the statement that Anne-Louise said earlier, that the T word is a bad word for me. I think it's all about the learning these days, rather than the pedagogical strategies that are being used. Anyways, a guiding question that we could use to actually help frame the kinds of elements that we're actually going to come up with would be, what pedagogical structures have you employed to support student learning in your courses? And what we'll need to do is provide opportunities for participants to list their elements that are related to the topic. And you need to record them in some way, shape, or form using a recording device. Well, we in fact have a recording device, or we have several recording devices. I hope that you've got access to some type of a electronic machine in some way, shape, or form. The WebGrid doesn't scale particularly well for phone, but it does work. If you've got a tablet or if you've got a laptop, that's even better. If you're in a group of 2 or 3 individuals that are fairly close to each other, so you can actually talk through this, that'd be absolutely wonderful. So what you'll need to do is get to WebGrid Plus. So you either go to grid.eilab or to webgrid.ubec.ca, and it'll look like that. The choice that we're going to make is this one down here. Enter an existing grid. And there are a number of different ways of actually going about doing this kind of work. That's the one that we choose at this point. And come on, don't do this now. Oh, there we are. All right, so what I'll need you to do is, working with 2 or 3 people who are close to you, fill in the information as we're going. So you'll essentially be building a list of elements. I would suggest that you actually come up with a set of questions. You should. So if you go here, you're going to be entering an existing grid. This choice down here. Help each other out.
You have to fill in all this stuff to start with.
What we're actually going to be doing is filling it in as you go. So when you actually get here, putting in a name is going to give you an opportunity to actually identify it, and it'll actually be able to save it for you as well. Putting the purpose in is sort of what is the aim of this WebGrid kind of piece. So you can talk amongst yourselves as to what kind of purpose do you want to have for the WebGrid process itself. Make one up if you need to. And then listing at least 6 elements in this space, each element on an individual line. An element can be 1 word, it can be a short phrase, a couple of or 3 words or so. And then you fill that all in and press done when you're finished. There is another system of doing this as well, where it actually runs through asking you questions, so it actually elicits responses from you at every stage of the process. Where are you actually streaming?
On the book.
Facebook?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I had Lana who was asking Jim, she couldn't find it. So she's not a part of the group, that's why.
I added her.
Did you? Okay. I'll mention it to her.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Doesn't have to. And that's part of another kind of sub-process that's actually part of it. What I did originally was actually separate those processes from each other. So you create your elements first, create your constructs first, second, and then you do the rating of elements versus constructs. And one nice thing about doing it that way, that is separating the elements and the constructs, is that you can actually send your participants away with a grid and allow them to fill it in at their own time, rather than taking up the time at the present. The problem with that is that you don't have access to what they're thinking as they're going through. So I usually use a talk aloud kind of process as they're going through the decision-making process, so that you've got that all recorded as well. It gives you far better data to make analysis of what's actually going on within the actual individual upgrades if you've got their recordings. Yes?
Well, now we've lost the grid. How to get back to it? Right. So,
There's something because it's not, it's not like careful. Everything was on your side and
you might actually go about doing this. I've also done a elicitation of elements and constructs using 3x5 cue cards, and everybody gets a set of 8 or 10 cue cards. They put their elements in, and then we negotiate by throwing them on the floor, try to figure out some sense out of what's going on with all the cards. Anne Louise, I know, I'm not quite sure exactly what she does, but she draws big circles on the floor, and she has people actually plant their bodies in specific places that identify their particular constructs, and then does the analysis based on that kind of piece. So there's a number of different ways of doing it. One of the things that I like best about WebGrid is that it does all the calculations for you. So once you get the actual data, the elements, the constructs, and the ratings of the elements versus the constructs, as an individual researcher, all you need to do is actually just put the information into the system, and it does all of the analysis for you to give you all of these different kinds of displays. So you get the cluster along with the match, and the match is essentially, I'll just pull it up for you a second, just to give you an idea as to what's going on here. So the match essentially just gives you those same kinds of relationships that we were seeing in terms of the elements and the constructs, but it also gives you a specific readout in terms of the correlations that are found between them. So essentially it's additional information to the cross-plot that we were looking at earlier. That draws us to the end. It's time for lunch, apparently, and I don't want to stand in the way of your lunch, so thank you so very much for being willing participants in this process, and I hope that it was of value to you.
thank you very much.